So this is my project for APHUG Geography on Rwandan refugees. During this presentation, I'll be discussing a series of events which have led up to the overall migration of these people. So as you can see, Rwanda is a fairly small country surrounded by land, specifically the Democratic Republic of Congo in the west, Uganda in the north, Tanzania in the east, and Burundi in the south. Despite being one of the most smallest countries in Africa, it is the most densely populated at 585 people per square mile. In 2012, the UN determined their population to be around 12 million, as you can see. So during the early 1900s, Rwanda was a Belgian colony. The Belgians favored the Tutsis more over the Hutus due to the Tutsis' more European-like body structure. They were taller, thinner, and lighter. So this created a resentment among the Hutus, which they have had before, but it was proliferated during this time period. The Belgians also created identity cards, as you can see in the top left, to distinguish those who were Hutu and those who were Tutsi. This played a major role during the genocide, which I will discuss at a later point. So for about 30 years, the Tutsis were the dominant force in Rwanda until the period of decolonization, which was in the late 1950s after World War II. The Hutus began to revolt against the Belgian power, and as the political movement, which stood to gain from majority rule, was gaining momentum, while the segments of Tutsi establishments resisted democratization and the loss of their acquired privileges. So basically, the Tutsis wanted the Belgians to stay, or else they would lose their privileges that were accompanied with them. The Hutu revolt was known as the Hutu Peasant Revolution, or a social revolution, lasting from 1959 to 1961. This revolution signified the end of the Tutsi domination and the sharpening of ethnic tensions. By the year 1962, Rwanda gained independence, with the Hutu in power under the government rule of Juvenal Habyarimana. Now, during this revolution, 120,000 people, primarily Tutsis, have taken refuge in neighboring states to escape the violence which had been accompanied through the gradual coming of power of the Hutu community. They fled to several places such as Tanzania, Burundi, and Uganda in the north. At the first delight of gaining power, the politically inexperienced Hutu government faced internal conflicts. They started off by making prejudiced reforms to the government. For example, in 1973, they banned Tutsis from attending secondary schools as well as universities. Now, along with this, in the 1980s, President Habyarimana began to lose popularity as the economy was depleted and government corruption was taking place. During this time, Tutsi refugees in Uganda were also forming the Rwandan Patriotic Front. Their goal was to overthrow Habyarimana's government and take back control of Rwanda. Habyarimana chose to exploit their threat as a way to bring dissident Hutus back to his side, and Tutsis inside Rwanda, who were often, and in most cases, innocent, they were accused of being RPF collaborators. This not only increased the hatred among Hutus, but also instilled fear among them. Now, just to provide some visuals, the Tutsi refugees who fled to Uganda during the Hutu Peasant Revolt were forming the RPF here in 1988. In 1990, they invaded Rwanda, starting the Civil War. Now, during the time period between 1990 and 1993, several forms of propaganda were expressed to increase hatred of the Tutsis among the Hutus. One example would be the 10 Commandments of the Hutus. And the first commandment stated that if a Hutu married a Tutsi woman, he would be deemed as a traitor. So as you can see, interaction between these two ethnic groups was highly prohibited by these propagandas. A second example would be the radio, and several radio stations use the term Hutu power to amplify the ideology that the Tutsis were, per se, cockroaches in the land of Rwanda. One specific radio station, the Mille des Collines, began broadcasting and spreading hate most widely and diffused most rapidly. Now, in 1993, the government of Rwanda and the RPF, along with the United Nations, signed a political agreement to allow the government to have positions of both Hutu and Tutsis. However, many of the governmental officers in Rwanda opposed this. When it was signed, it didn't do much to end the tensions between these two ethnic groups. The match was lit on April 6, 1994, when President Habyarimana was killed in a plane crash. Violence began almost immediately after that. Under the cover of war, Hutu extremists launched their plans to destroy the entire Tutsi civilian population. Political leaders who might have been able to take charge of the situation and other high-profile opponents of the Hutu extremist plans were killed immediately. Tutsi and people suspected of being Tutsi were killed in their homes as they tried to flee at roadblocks set up across the country during the genocide. Entire families were killed at times. Women were systematically raped, and an estimated of about 200,000 people participated in the perpetration of the Rwanda genocide. Although on a large scale, this genocide was carried out entirely by hand, often using machetes and clubs. Local officials assisted in rounding up victims and making suitable places available for their slaughter. Tutsi men, women, children, and babies were killed in thousands of schools. Even aid agencies were helpless. Having let into compound or hospital people injured or in flight, they were forced to leave them there. Few survived. The UN backed out after 10 of their soldiers were killed. The end result? After 100 days, 800,000 men, women, and children perished from the Rwandan genocide, perhaps as many as 3/4 of the Tutsi population. This is a graph showing here the population of Rwanda from 1960 to 2003, and as you can see, there's a significant drop in population during the time period of the genocide, which happened to be 1994. Now, the main cause of this was the genocide, and another minor factor of it was migration. Subsequently, after the genocide, an estimated 63,000 refugees, primarily Tutsi, moved from Rwanda to northern Burundi, and an estimated 500,000 refugees fled to Tanzania. These people were fortunate enough to escape the brutality of this genocide. Finally, in July, the RPF captured Kigali, the capital. The Rwandan government collapsed, and the RPF declared a ceasefire and took over Rwanda. Now, there was a wave of refugees in flee of hope of not being persecuted by the vengeful RPF who had taken the offensive. These refugees include many who have since been implicated in the massacres. Push factors, which were the main players for the refugees, were political unrest or war, inadequate supplies in Rwanda, and social inequality. And for the Hutu specifically, it was mainly fear of persecution. Pull factors included the security and safety and foreign aid in the refugee camp. Now, as you can see, subsequently after the genocide, or during the genocide at some points, the Tutsis fled to Tanzania, Burundi, and Uganda. Now, when the RPF gained control of Rwanda, Hutus fled to Democratic Republic of Congo, specifically 850,000. Some fled to the south, 650,000. Those who fled to Burundi fled at a number of 270,000. And Hutu refugees also fled to Tanzania at 570,000. Despite being refugees, the Hutu extremist militants still carried attacks against RPF in the refugee camps. Not only did this make it difficult to stabilize the Rwandan government, but now bordering countries were becoming part of the war. With an extremely limited number of voluntary repatriation and an increasing number of crude birth rates, host countries such as Uganda and Tanzania were beginning to find it extremely difficult to run these camps. Due to the disparity of resources and raging war, the camps quickly deteriorated. After almost 2 decades, refugees are still present in these several foreign camps. The average camp area per refugee in the Congo is 16.2 square meters, posing sanitation and hygiene problems, as the standard area should be 45 square meters. In recent years, the UN, along with several other nations, have been trying to help these refugees gain their Rwanda citizenship yet again. The UN is ending their status to encourage repatriation, but many are reluctant in fear of persecution. Those who are reluctant happen to be the Hutus who have carried out the genocide. Unfortunately, there are still several thousands of refugees in bordering countries. Specifically, 55,325 refugees residing in the border of Rwanda. But the UN has been also seeking to implement tripartite agreements with various countries hosting Rwandan refugees. That way, conflicts can begin to reside with the UN partaking in this issue. Despite struggles, the UNHCR has taken significant steps in reducing the number of refugees in bordering countries. In 2010, nearly 10,000 Rwandan refugees returned to their home voluntarily. Another 4,000 had returned by July 2011. In summary, the Rwandan refugees were first forced to migrate to other countries due to political oppression, disparity in social classes, and fear of persecution. It has made it difficult on Rwanda to establish an equal and prosperous government, and has made it difficult for the bordering nations to establish peaceful relations with Rwanda. The refugees, along with Rwanda itself, will take years before its recovery from the horrific genocide.